Hello, welcome to today's video where I'm going to give you a build review of PR Racing's newest two-wheel drive buggy, the B10R. Now the B10R is what I would call a factory spec kit, meaning that it comes loaded with many option parts in the box. In other words, you'll find that the car comes standard with many performance and tuning parts that you need to purchase separately for many other race buggies from other brands. Like these shocks that come with low friction coated bodies and shafts, these beautifully machined C-hubs, and carbon fiber battery mounts. I'll talk more about some of these in the video, but for all the details of what you find in this kit, check out my full unboxing video. So in today's video, let me first take you through the build steps in the manual, where I will highlight any build tips or point out features or things to note. And then at the end, I will share some of my overall thoughts about the entire build and what I think about the car so far. I've also actually run this car at the track, so I will talk a little bit about how it performs. And at the end, I want to share with you something cool I have planned for this car. So let's get started with my build review. In the very first step, you install the side guards onto the chassis. As stated in the manual, take note of the 2 screws at the back, which are shorter 3x6mm screws compared to the rest of the 8 screws, which are 8mm long. I found that PR plastics are very good and provide quite a positive feel, especially when you tighten the screws up. 2 tips I want to suggest whenever you are threading screws into plastic. Firstly, try to use a good hex driver with a fresh tip. I personally recommend MIP drivers if your budget permits. They are great tools and they last a long time. Tip number 2 is to add a spot of black grease included in the kit into the screw hole before threading the screw in. This will make it easier to install the screw. In the next step, you install the 2 small chassis braces on the side rails. The manual highlights you can replace these with heavier bronze options for weight or carbon fiber versions for stiffness. You also assemble the steering posts onto the front kick-up. One little design feature that I liked is that the posts are beautifully machined to precisely key into the kick-up plate so they fit snugly and are less likely to come loose. Now in step A2, you assemble the new reverse steering assembly. This is one of the major new revisions compared to all the previous S1 buggies from PR. This step's not difficult, but pay attention to the orientation of all the plastic parts. PR has molded top on the center link and L and R on the bell cranks to help you get everything right. And there's also a final picture of the assembly at the bottom of the page to compare with, so just check to be doubly sure. Now, I've heard of plastic steering assemblies on buggies from big brands that are poorly molded, so there's a lot of play in the final steering setup. But I'm happy to report that the fit is excellent, so there is really minimal slop. And because everything rides on bearings, the whole assembly is incredibly smooth. As noted in the manual, be careful not to over-tighten the shoulder screws that connect the center links to the bell cranks. These should be able to turn freely. On to step A4. Here is just the servo tie rod assembly. Nothing complicated, but I did find that the recommended length in the manual was too short for my low-profile Sanwa PGS CL2 servo that I run. The recommended length is probably right for a full-height servo. You can actually only tell once the entire front steering is assembled, but ideally for this buggy, the servo horn should point straight up when the buggy wheels are pointed straight ahead, and the length of the servo tie rod should be adjusted to get this as close as possible. I found that adding a 2.5mm spacer between the 2 rod ends is just about right for my servo, but that also means that the included 3x8mm set screw is not threaded deep into the rod ends. So I would recommend if you go with a longer rod like I have, then use a longer threaded rod in the middle. 10mm should be about right. In step A5, you attach the servo to the beautifully machined one-piece servo mount. Again, this is an expensive option that you must purchase separately for some other buggies. PR also gets style points here for giving you carbon plates to clamp your servo to the one-piece mount. Typically, simple washers are used for this, but here we have nice carbon pieces. There's even a little slot cut out to accommodate the bracing on most servos between the 2 mounting holes. I found that I still needed to trim the bracing on my servo just a little bit for the plates to sit flat on the servo mounting tabs. You may want to check when doing your install. In step A6, you install the servo. Just make sure you use thread lock when your screws thread into metal parts, like here. In step B1, you install the arms. The manual recommends greasing the hinge pins, but I prefer to run my hinge pins without grease. Even if you grease them, I suggest just a very slight coating will do. PR includes 2 different front arms for tuning your car. It may be hard to tell from the pictures, but the recommended setup in the manual is the gull wing arm. Step B2 is the front steering hub assembly. Be sure to check your left and right knuckles and not to get them mixed up. Included in the kit is PR's latest machined C-hubs that look awesome. They also allow you to adjust the height of your axles, which has become a useful tuning option. The kit recommends the lowest axle position, but I typically run a medium setting which just swaps the thicker spacer to the bottom while keeping the 1mm shim on the top. Now, one build tip here. If you find that after assembly the knuckle is a bit tight in the C-hub and does not turn freely, you might want to just sand the knuckle lightly with a bit of sandpaper. I used 600 grit sandpaper and just carefully took off some plastic from the bottom of each knuckle until everything freed up. The stock assembly actually was not excessively tight, and I suspect it would have freed up after some running. But I prefer to just have it taken care of as I build it right now. In B3, just take care to install the camberling mounts on the shock tower as indicated. Just to make sure that they are square, I line them up on the edge of my work table as I tighten up the screws. Step B4 is a simple step, but I really like the thought process behind having a screw attach the hinge pin block to the upper brace. This screw is not really essential for the entire assembly, but having it there means that the front end holds together when you are servicing the car, and it's a nice touch. Step B5, everybody's favorite step, building turnbuckles. Just 2 quick tips here. 1, as the manual says, it's a good practice to keep the notches to the same side for the whole car so that the turnbuckles are easy to adjust. Tip number 2, dabbing some grease into the holes before threading is going to help a lot here. Oh, there are also 2 lengths of rod ends on the plastic tree included, so make sure you use the right ones according to the lengths indicated in the manual. These are 1:1 diagrams in the manual, so you can actually use them for direct comparison. Step B7, there's nothing much here, but do pay attention to the orientation of the different spacers and parts. It's easy to make mistakes here, but don't ask me how I know. Moving on to step 8, we install the rear hubs onto the arms. Again, I found that the hubs were a little snug when installed and they did not rotate freely. I took my sandpaper and sanded the plastic spacer just a little bit to fix that. Step B9, we install the rear arms to the car with the nicely machined RF and RR blocks. Multiple inserts are given to adjust your anti-squat, your toe-in, and actually also your track width and roll center. On my kit, I found the inserts were very tight, particularly on the RR block. So be sure you insert them fully, otherwise the suspension arm may bind up when fully assembled. Moving on to step B10, we install these awesome chassis stiffeners here. Don't forget your Loctite. These braces make the traditional waterfall brace unnecessary, and I believe they are key to the improved rear grip of the B10R that I've experienced on track. We move on to the gear differential in step C. Nothing complicated, just follow the instructions. I started with 5,000 weight oil for my outdoor AstroTurf track, but I've since gone up to 7,000 weight as I felt it stabilized the corner exits better for the way that I drive. Step C2, we put the gearbox halves together. Now the new machined idler gear looks amazing, and although I haven't weighed it, it feels significantly lighter than the previous machined gear. This should translate to a lower rotating mass and faster acceleration overall. In this step, I found that the long 3x20mm screws that hold the gearbox halves together can be hard to tighten correctly. Because there's so much thread going into the plastic, the resistance can be quite strong, making it hard to feel when the halves are tightened. So be careful not to over tighten the screws, especially this one right at the front top of the gearbox. The gearbox should of course be properly closed, but not so tight that the gears cannot turn freely. I actually opted to use a 3mm tap to tap the gearbox holes here for a more precise build. The car is equipped with spacers to adjust your differential height to 2 possible settings. Make sure you use the right spacers and orient the left and right ones correctly, or your gearbox will bind. In the next step, the rear anti-roll bar is installed. The little yellow heat shrink is just to indicate the thickness of the bar you have used in case you buy other options from PR that will come labeled in different colors. In step C3, you install the motor plate and the slipper assembly. Now this new motor plate is heavily lightened for weight and it looks great. The slipper assembly is also new and moves the slipper spring to the left of the gearbox for better balance. So far, I've noticed that this design also helps the spur to spin more true as an added bonus. When installing the washers that hold the slipper spring, just make sure you have the correct orientation of the parts. One note at this point, the buggy actually comes with 2 spur gears, a 77T and a 75T. So you have a greater range of gear ratios you can run. However, in my kit, the 77T spur gear could not fit as the center hole was an incorrect 6mm instead of the 5mm it should be. The 75T spur gear was fine. A check with PR has confirmed that this packing error affected a small number of kits, and if you happen to be affected, you may want to check with your PR supplier. In step C4, when installing the camber link ball ends, I recommend a dab of thread lock. Take note when installing the wing mounts, there's an optional spacer if you prefer to move the mounts further back. But if you choose this setting, please use the included 3x12mm screws to attach the wing mounts instead of the 3x10mm ones. When we move to step C5, the note in the manual says the motor needs to be installed here, but that was more relevant for the previous V4 buggy. In this car, I personally did not see the need to install the motor at this point. C6 is a no-brainer, install the rear gearbox to the chassis. Moving on to step C7 and 8, we install the rear roll bar assembly and the rear camber links. In step D, we move on to the shocks. The assembly is not difficult, but pay attention to the parts listed and the order that they go together. I recommend a little bit of green slime from Team Associated to coat all the O-rings. In the following pages, the manual gives quite clear instructions on how to bleed the shocks. Now, if you would like a video on how to bleed PR shocks, leave a comment and let me know. This car actually comes with a full set of PR green springs, which is interesting. I normally run greens in front, but I typically run softer yellow or red springs in the rear. Surprisingly, the greens have been excellent. It seems that PR has done their homework. For those wondering, I'm running the stock pistons and springs with TLR 35 weight all around. In step D2, we install the shocks onto the chassis. I really like the upper shock mounts now. In earlier versions, the spacers and the balls were plastic, and the plastic spacers would flex a little and over time weaken the shock mounting screw, which would eventually fail, and the plastic balls were prone to wear. They are now full metal parts and have increased the durability significantly. Step D3. Now, one nice feature of this car is the ability to mount the rear shock tower in 2 positions. The standard position is on the rear of the gearbox, but if you choose to mount it on the front of the gearbox, the parts and instructions to do so are provided. Step D4, we install the front shock tower protector. Here, 2 options are provided in the kit. You will be threading the screws into the carbon fiber shock tower. This can be quite tough, so use a good hex driver and a dab of grease if it helps. In step D5, the battery retainers are installed. I actually like these very much. Firstly, they are quality carbon fiber parts compared to softer plastic versions I've seen included in some other kits. Secondly, they feature a spring to tension the battery retainer, which is a better way of properly giving the retainers some tension to operate properly. As I expected from a full race car, the whole system is adjustable to move the battery forward or back to adjust the weight distribution. And it can also accommodate standard height or low CG shorty LiPo batteries. In the next step, it is just the ESC plate installation. But man, the included carbon fiber plate was the first thing so many people at the track commented on when they saw the buggy. It looks really slick. Nice that PI includes this instead of just a molded plastic piece. You can also replace this with an optional bronze plate for weight if needed. In this step, you also see the optional front wing that can be installed. The nice thing about this optional wing is that it is molded out of lightweight and flexible plastic instead of Lexan, so it should be significantly more durable. In step D7, it's just a simple install of a body support. In the next step, we install the 1mm rear wing that is actually quite durable for a stock buggy wing. Just take note to drill the holes 35mm apart instead of the 30mm indicated in the wing molding. In this step, I also would like to point out a little feature on the B10R that I really like. It has some very neat cable management. The car has a channel in the middle of the chassis for the motor sensor cable. It also has channels in the side guards for the motor fan wires. This cleans up the wiring quite a bit, and the finished car can look very clean with fewer visible wires and without the rear waterfall as well. Finally, we get to the body. The instructions recommend cutting above the cut line if you are running on high grip tracks. I just went with the standard cut lines for my body, but I would recommend deciding on how much to remove only after you finish your electronics install and test fit the body on the car. Overall, for electronics, I'm running a Sanwa PGS CL2 servo, a Hobbywing XR10 G2 ESC with a Surpass Rocket V3 8.5 turn motor. I've also installed a Surpass metal motor fan, which has proven really reliable in my other buggies, and it looks great. Let's talk about my overall build impressions. I thought the car went together really well, and the quality of the parts felt premium throughout the entire build. The fit of the parts was also excellent, and there was no significant slop that I felt anywhere. There were one or two parts that required a little sanding, but I think that's to be expected given the nature of the plastic molding process. But I'm much happier to do just that little bit of sanding than to try to fix sloppy parts. The instructions, they were very good, and I think should prove to be no problem for anyone with just a little bit of experience building kits. The included setup information in the manual is also helpful for those trying to get some basic understanding of what to expect from each change. PR has come a long way with their kits, and many first-time builders are often surprised at the quality and finish of PR cars. The B10R is certainly no exception. The new front end looks really nicely executed, and the overall chassis looks clean and ready to race. The aluminum and carbon fiber parts add just the right amount of bling to the chassis, and I especially like the look of the dark gold shock bodies. And these shocks are not just for looks. The low friction coated bodies really work, and they are exceptionally smooth with a difference that can be felt on the bench and on the track. The new reverse steering of the car comes together very well and is smooth and slop free. I've also tested it on the track and can confirm that the B10R has not lost the impressive steering that was a characteristic of the S1 range of buggies. I've run this buggy at the track and it was impressive from the start. Compared to the S1 V4 out of the box, this buggy immediately feels like it has a more planted rear end. When I handed the radio to other drivers to try, many immediately commented on the shock package and how good it felt. The car landed jumps very well, it settles quickly so it can be driven with confidence. A more detailed run video will be up next, where I share more detailed running impressions and also some setup changes that I made. So please subscribe if you're interested to see that. Now, I'm also quite excited to share a project I have in mind for this car. I can't take credit for the idea though, as it has actually been floating around on a number of Facebook pages for PR communities. The plan is to convert this awesome buggy into a racing truck using parts all readily available from PR Racing. There are already a few of these B10R T conversions I've seen online, and they look really cool. Based on some reports, they have even won some races first time out. Now, I myself haven't really been much of a stadium truck fan, but the conversions look too good not to try. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see a video of my B10R in truck trim. So this concludes my build review of PR Racing's exciting new B10R 2wd drive buggy. Next up, a track test, and then a post-run review. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.